While the country coped with the Oklahoma City tragedy, the office of the Independent Counsel did not rest. On Saturday, April 22nd, after the children's meeting in the Oval Office, Kenneth Starr and his deputies arrived at the White House to take sworn statements from me and the president. As Bill came out of his interview, he told me his encounter with Starr had been amiable, and to my amazement, Bill had asked an aide to give Starr and his assistants a tour of the Lincoln bedroom next door. Somewhat characteristically, I was not prepared to be as charitable as my husband. We were both in the eye of the storm, but I seemed to be buffeted by every gust of wind, while Bill just sailed along. The Republicans opened up a new front when Al D'Amato, the Republican senator from New York and chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, convened hearings on Whitewater. I have since made my peace with Senator D'Amato, but the hearings he and his fellow Republican senators and their staffs conducted inflicted great emotional and monetary damage on innocent people. Maggie Williams, normally centered and strong, was brought to tears by relentless questioning about events surrounding Vince Foster's death. D'Amato called my friend Susan Thomas a liar as she tried to answer his questions. Her decades-long struggle with multiple sclerosis had impaired her memory, and she tried as hard as she could to respond to the bullying interrogation. I couldn't console her or anyone caught up in this nightmare, because any discussion I might have with someone could suggest collusion or coaching. Standing on the sidelines was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and it would get worse before it got better. Undaunted by the facts, the D'Amato Committee continued to probe my association with McDougal's Savings and Loan. Ken Starr's investigation was supposedly confidential, but his team was displaying a remarkable talent for calculated leaks to the media. In late '95, Dick Morris came to see me to deliver a bizarre message. I was going to be indicted for something as yet undefined, and, quote, people close to Starr suggested I accept the indictment and ask Bill to pardon me before trial. I assumed Morris was carrying water for his Republican clients or contacts, so I chose my words very carefully. Tell your sources, I said, to report to Starr's people that even though I have done nothing wrong, I am well aware that in the immortal words of Edward Bennett Williams, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich if he chooses. And if Starr does, I would never ask for a pardon. I will go to trial and show Starr up for the fraud he is. Are you sure you want me to say that? Morris asked me. Word for word, I replied. In the ruckus over budgets and shutdowns, an important development in the Whitewater investigation passed almost unnoticed. Findings of the Resolution Trust Corporation's report on Whitewater were finally made public just before Christmas. After examining 47 witnesses, compiling 200,000 documents, and spending $3.6 million, the investigators found no evidence of misconduct on our part and no factual basis for any aspect of the Whitewater scandal. The report was minimally covered in the news media. Republicans dismissed the investigation by the Resolution Trust Corporation as too narrow and continued their hearings. In an editorial critical of the Office of the Independent Counsel, the New York Times chastised Starr for continuing in his $1-million-a-year private law practice while investigating the White House. The sudden burst of unfavorable press had no noticeable effect on Starr. I was dismayed by the double standard that protected Starr and his patrons from accountability, while the conservative faction openly played the conflict of interest card to eliminate nonpartisan jurists and investigators. I felt terrible that former Arkansas Governor Jim Guy Tucker and his wife Betty had been caught up in Starr's fishing expedition. Despite Starr's effort, Jim Guy wouldn't lie about us. This didn't prevent Starr from pushing ahead with another indictment that put Tucker on trial with Jim and Susan McDougal in Little Rock, Arkansas in March 1996. Most of the accusations against them could be traced to David Hale, a shady Arkansas Republican businessman. Hale was an accomplished thief and a con artist, and he was motivated. He was cooperating with Starr in hopes of avoiding a long prison sentence for his previous crimes. The Small Business Administration, which had lent Hale's company millions of dollars intended to benefit small businesses and low-income people, reported that it had lost $3.4 million due to Hale's improper activities. His sentencing was postponed until just before the McDougal-Tucker trial 2 years later. Defense lawyers argued hard to convince the judge to admit testimony about Hale's connections with right-wing activists and financial payments from the Office of the Independent Counsel. Although the presiding judge wouldn't admit evidence of most of Hale's lucrative connections, and the full story would not come out for years, details of the secret Arkansas project began to be aired in public for the first time. Hale was a well-paid pawn in a furtive campaign designed to discredit Bill and bring down his administration. Not only was Hale paid at least $56,000 in cash by the Office of the Independent Counsel after he agreed to testify, Hale was also secretly paid by the Arkansas Project. As the convoluted facts of Whitewater finally started coming out in court, I could feel a subtle change in the atmospheric pressure in Washington. On Capitol Hill, Senator D'Amato stopped his Whitewater hearings when the Democrats threatened to filibuster to block his funding. For the first time in years, I was beginning to hope that we could put Whitewater behind us. Yet despite these hopeful moments, the spring of 1996 was not destined to be a time of celebration. The Republicans had lost 9 seats in the House and 2 in the Senate in the election, but they still were in control of both chambers of Congress, and they gave more leadership positions to ideologues rather than to moderates or pragmatists. The new chairman of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, Representative Dan Burton from Indiana, was the Hill's leading conspiracy theorist. He had achieved minor celebrity for firing a .38 caliber pistol at a watermelon in his backyard as part of a bizarre attempt to prove that Vince Foster was murdered. Several key Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, had already vowed that it was their responsibility to continue investigating the Clinton administration, but the Whitewater inquiry seemed to be losing momentum. Senator D'Amato had suspended his hearings in June. Despite prolonged questioning, Kenneth Starr had failed to wrest any damning tidbit from Webb Hubbell, who was serving 18 months in federal prison for defrauding his clients and partners. In January 1998, Kenneth Starr's inquiry was in its 4th year. The previous fall, Starr had finally conceded that Vince Foster really had committed suicide. Bill and I had worried about the problems we would face when we moved into the White House, but I never expected that the way I defined my role as First Lady would generate so much controversy and confusion. We were living in an era in which some people still felt deep ambivalence about women in positions of public leadership and power. In this era of changing gender roles, I was America's Exhibit A. The scrutiny was overwhelming. Bill signed a series of bills that I had worked for, including ensuring that women be allowed to stay for more than 24 hours after childbirth in the hospital, promoting mammography and prostate screening, increasing research into diabetes, and improving childhood vaccination rates so that 90% of all 2-year-olds were immunized against the most serious childhood illnesses for the first time ever. Bill also took on the tobacco lobby and began seriously addressing HIV/AIDS here at home and around the world. He used his presidential prerogative to extend patients' rights to more than 85 million Americans and their dependents who were enrolled in the federal health plans, and to those covered by Medicare, Medicaid, and the Veterans Health System. None of these actions represented a seismic shift on the order of the Health Security Act, but collectively, these reforms of health care policy improved conditions for tens of millions of Americans. On balance, I think we made the right decision to try to reform the whole system.